Alright guys, welcome back to our session on input box. In Excel Visual Basic Application, an input box, right, is basically a dialog box that allows the users to enter some kind of values. Okay, so by having the values inputted, it allows us to have highly interactive and dynamic macros, alright, as the users are able to provide information dynamically during the runtime. Okay, so there are two types of input boxes in VBA. We have the Excel input box and the VBA input box. We'll go through the differences and understand how each can be effectively used in programming. Okay, so mainly we will learn how to declare, how to write them, as well as how to anticipate and perform error handling to prevent the codes from crashing during runtime. Okay, so I have this table in front of me, right? My lecture slides, right? Basically, that outlines the difference between the VB input box and the Excel input box. Okay, so declaring an Excel input box and VB input box, we tend to declare them both as variable. Okay, so we're just going to ignore this table for now on the Excel input box. Let's just ignore this for now. But we generally declare both of them as variable, as having both of them as variant basically mean they can be of any type. Okay, now the first difference between the Excel input box and the VB input box is the fact that in the case of an Excel input box, you are required to specify the type of variable that you want the users to enter. Okay, so 0. The type of variables is right on this table here, right? So it's going to enlarge it a little bit, right? So 0 is formula, 1 is number, 2 is text, 4 is logical value, 8 is a range, 16 and 64 generally, right? So if you specify it as number 1, basically you are compelling the user to enter a number type of input. So what if the user doesn't enter a number type of input? Then this Excel input box performs a self-validation. Okay, so the VB input box has a similar way of writing it, with the exception that we do not have that type declaration. Okay, the type declaration is not there. So VB input box is far more flexible in that sense. Okay, so the next question is, well, what happens if we enter a wrong input, right? So suppose you told me that, well, Elias, in Excel input box has no type declaration. So does that mean I could enter any type of variable? Yes, the answer is yes. Okay, but with the Excel input box, Excel performs a self-validation. So this is a native built-in functionality of Excel that performs a self-validation. Okay, now what if the user hits cancel without entering anything? Okay, so I have this input box dialog box appearing, right? And if I decide to just cancel it, then what happens? Well, in the case of the VBA input box, okay, if you hit the cancel button, the input box will register the value of 0. Okay, so that's why we will avoid that and use if VBA input box equals to blank, then exit sum. Okay, so this is something that we will go into in depth in the VB editor. So in the case of the Excel input box, the second difference is that it's going to result in debug error. Okay, that's why we use the on error go to leave to account for the cancellation. Okay, so the 3 key difference is that number 1, the Excel input box, right? Type declaration not required, type declaration required, and then so this is number 2, also part of number 1. So because the type declaration is required, it performs the self-validation. Because the type is not required, it doesn't perform a self-validation. Okay, it's a variant type. I'm going to set any type of argument. Okay, and finally, what if we hit cancel without entering anything? Okay, so there'll be a difference between these two. Okay, so let's get on to the VBA editor and see how we can work through some practice problems. Okay. Right, so I'm just gonna have sub VBA input box. Okay, all right. So I told you that I always declare both types of input box as variant. Okay, so I suggest you to do that as well, just to save you from the headache, right, of having to debug and all of that, right? Because we know that variant to account any type. Okay, so you don't don't have to be thinking, well, is it due to the type of the variable the users inputted, or is it due to the variable that I declared, so you don't have to go through all of that. So just declare it as a variable. Okay, it's the one and only right way to do it. Okay, all right. So VBA input box equals to, okay. So in the case of a VBA input box, I'm going to use a VBA dot input box, right? So we are writing it in the same way as the Excel input box, but we don't have the type declaration. Remember that. So the prompt is basically what you're asking the user to do, right? So I'm gonna, if I remember correctly, it's something like this. It's something like this, yeah. So and then you're gonna have input value, right? So you're asking, commanding the user what to do, right? And then we're just gonna have title, right? The title of the dialog box, right? So it's just gonna be test. So you can see all the possible parameters, right? So you have the title, and then you have the prompt. Okay, so you can select whatever it is, and then just have this double dot with the equal, right? Okay, I don't know what you call this, right? Yeah, so it's not a semicolon, right? It's a double dot, whatever. Okay, so test for value, and then I'm just gonna close it. Okay, and then now what I'm gonna say is that if, okay, well, I'm not gonna show you the what happens when we exit the sub. Let's run the code. Okay, let's run the code. Okay, sub VBA input box. Now I have sub VBA input box. I'm gonna run it. Input a value. I'm just gonna put 20, right? And then, well, the 20 has been registered, but since we are not able to see it, so what I'm gonna say is I'm just gonna return the value into range A1 dot value equals to VBA input box, so that we can have a look at what exactly is going on. Okay, right. So now we're gonna run the thing. I'm just gonna, I don't know, I can just input anything, right? I'm gonna input anything, and you see it's returning the value onto A1. Now what happens if we click cancel, right? This is the case of cancellation. Remember what I told you? You see, it's basically going it's basically erasing the value that was previously registered into A1. So I'm going to show you again. I'm going to run SSD, okay, so, and then I'm going to run again, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit cancel. Okay, as you could see, it's just deleting all the value, and we don't want that. We don't want that. So this is basically what I meant, right? So if user hit cancel, right, the input box register value is 0, right? Basically not 0, but it's as something like blank, right? So 0 meaning as in like as blank. Okay, so to avoid that, that's basically why we have to use this command right here. Okay, why we're going to use this command, VBA dot input box equals to blank. So then exit the sub. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it into the VBA editor. Okay, so by doing this, now the value is not going to get deleted. Okay, so now if I'm gonna and just gonna write something here. Okay, we always exit the sub if user hits cancel. Okay, so it's not gonna affect the value that has been registered. So now if I run it, I input some value, and then I run it again, but now I don't have any value. You see, the value is retained. The value is retained. Okay, so that's about it for the VBA input box. Let's move on to the Excel input box. Okay, slightly more complicated, but it's very much manageable. Okay, so Excel input box number. So we're gonna go to the number, right? So we have these different types of type declaration. 0 for formula, 1 for number, text, 2 for string. So I just know that the most popular ones are basically number, text, and range. Okay, so you can get a range, then you can look through the collection, whatever. Okay, we've gone through all of them, right? So this topic is, we're going to touch on the fundamentals of input box. Okay, and we're going to put our focus right there. So dim, I'm just going to say Excel input box number as variant. Okay, so it's a variant type. Okay, You never go wrong with variant. And then the next thing I'm going to say, Excel input box number equals to Excel dot application dot run application dot input box. Okay, and then I'm going to copy this thing, right? I'm going to say it. Okay, so because this is going to be a number, and remember it's an input box, so just input a number. I'm just going to say, because we're going to put type 1. Okay, test for number. And type is just going to be 1. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just run the code. Okay, we're going to run the code. Okay, so now I have the example box number. Now if I insert a number, it's working fine. Okay, there's no crash. But what if I don't input a number? If I put a text, you see, it performs Excel's native error handling is activated. Okay, so it forces us to input a number. Now what if I hit cancel? Right, cancel, we are not falling into a debug error. Okay, so that is because we have declared it as type 1. However, if you declare it as type range, right? If you were to declare it as type range, right? If you declare it as type range, and then I run the input box again, and then I hit cancel, it's giving me a debug error. Okay, so that is the reason why, to simplify life for everyone, what I do is, whether it's number or range, right, whatever the type is, I just like to do this. Okay, so basically I'm saying on error go to, okay, to avoid debug error when we cancel. That's all. Okay, so I know that we didn't see the debug error when we used the number, type declaration, but we did see it in the case of a range. So instead of having to remember that, right, because you already have a lot to remember, and I'm just going to exit the sub, right? So if on error go to leave, and then if there's no error, then we just exit the sub. So we don't want this line to run. So, but if there is an error, then it's just going to say message box please input number only. Okay, so now I can just run the macro again. I cancel it, and there's no error. Okay, because this is anyway type 1. But now if I go type 8, right, this is a range, and then set Excel input box number, and then I run it, and then I just cancel it. It's going to say please input number only. Okay, so I can also change it to string. So if it's a string, you have to remember that string is, we don't have to use the keyword set, but when we use range, we have to use the word keyword set, right? Because range is an object, right? Range is an object. Okay, so now type 2 is a string. So if I run the macro and I hit cancel, no problem. So it only happens for the range, but it's good to have this, right? On error go to leave. It's not going to hurt whether you have it for the number or string case. Okay, but if you're going to do range, then you need to have the keyword set type 8. Okay, and how do we input range? Well, very simple. The way we're going to input range is we're going to run it, and then we're just going to select a range and click OK. Right? And now you see it's not giving us an error. Okay? So if you want to check the range that has been returned, I'm just going to say debug.print Excel input number dot address. Okay, so we're going to see the results in the VBA editor right now. Okay, so Excel input box number, variable not defined, Excel input box, right, number, box number dot address. Now we're going to run it again. So actually it's a range, okay, because it's type 8. So forget the prompt right there, okay? Don't worry about the prompt. If I go to Visual Basic Application, you see it's returning the range there, right? So similarly, if I turn it into the number type, okay, type 1, then I can just Excel input box number, not address now, but I can return the value, okay? So I can run a macro. That one is just 25. Please input number only. Okay. So I'm trying to see what happened, right? Why did it give this input number only? Which means there was an error. Right, I'll get to you in a second. Alright, I think we can't have this debug.print Excel box number.value, right? So we just have to cancel that, right? We can't have that, right? We can't have that. So now if I run the macro, I put 25, okay? Not resolving an error. So I think it has something to do with the debug.print there, okay? Maybe you can't do it for the input box, okay? Right? You can't have the input box number. Maybe you can do it for the address for the range. But so if you want to test, you have to return the value into some range and then you can test it. But I'm not going to go there because this video is getting a little bit too lengthy. So we have already basically gone through the case for Excel input box and VBA input box. Declaring it, we declare both of them as variant. Writing it the same way, but for the Excel input box, you have the type declaration. And because you have the type declaration, it ensures user to input certain data, in the certain type we want. So if we have number, it has to be entered number. Otherwise, it's going to activate its own native built-in error handling. Okay. So with the VBA, there's no wrong input. Okay, because it doesn't have that data type declaration. Right, the number type, data type declaration basically. Okay, and finally the user hits cancel. We always have these for the case of the VBA input box. Alright, we've gone through why we should do this, right? And then for the Excel input box, it results in debug error for the range type, but it doesn't result in debug error for other types. However, we still use the on error go to account for cancellation. Okay, so that's about it, guys, for the input box and VBA and basically Excel as well. Okay, so I'll see you in the next session where we will go into message box. Okay, this is another interesting topic.